Welcome, everyone, to this session of our June 2024 Small Cap Conference. I'm Alex Hantman, and I serve as an Equity Research Associate here at Sidoti and Company. Today, I'm pleased to be in conversation with President and CEO Dr. Paul Goode of Glucotrack, ticker GCTK. During the presentation, please feel welcome to submit questions using the Zoom Q&A interface at the bottom of your screen. After the presentation, we'll open to your questions. And with that, Paul, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Alex. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today. Look forward to sharing with you what we have here at Glucotrack, how we're working towards advancing diabetes management by bringing novel continuous glucose monitoring technologies to market. We'll go briefly over a bit of the company history and leadership team and touch on the diabetes market, and in particular dive into the CGM market a little bit to set the framework for what we're going to discuss, which is essentially continuous glucose monitoring and the challenges associated with that, which then leads into the two novel pathways that we have, two novel technologies for the market. In short, the company started, almost 25 years ago. It's an Israeli tech company working on a non-invasive spot measurement device for measuring glucose. It was an ear clip device. After about 10 plus years, the company got a CE mark, and that was around 10 years ago. The company around that time also raised money in the public markets, which is when we entered the capital markets. The company continued to innovate on that technology. But slowly over that time frame, the industry was shifting away from spot measurements to continuous glucose measurement. As a result, we have also made a similar pivot to a very novel continuous glucose sensing technology. That's what we're here to talk about today. Our leadership team has deep experience in the diabetes tech space, in particular in the continuous glucose monitoring space. Several of us were at Dexcom in the early years when it was still a startup pre-IPO, and through the IPO, there were also leadership in different other roles, such as MiniMed prior to Medtronic, Abbott Diabetes, Senseonics, and Intuity. We also have a deep experience in implantable devices, production, and patient monitoring devices. Diabetes is a very well-known problem. It's a growing problem, unfortunately. In general, there are two types of diabetes, type 1 and type 2. Type 1 is where patients cannot produce their own insulin and are therefore insulin dependent. Type 2 are for patients who eventually become insulin dependent over time. Not all of them are insulin dependent. Type 2 is more of a lifestyle disorder, whereas type 1 is more of an immunological disorder. And so there's about 9 or 10 times more type 2 patients than there are type 1. Because it's lifestyle, that's the growing indication. You can see that the costs, healthcare costs rising over time, and you can also see the amount of morbidity, leading cause of blindness, one of the leading causes of heart disease and kidney disease, and of course, one of the top 10 leading causes of death. One of the ways that patients take care of their diabetes, of course, is treating with insulin. How do they know how to treat with insulin? It's with glucose monitoring. Most of you may be familiar with the blood glucose monitoring or the spot measurements, where a patient will stick their finger, put a drop of blood on a strip, and get a readout of where the blood is at that time. About 25 years ago, CGM, or continuous glucose monitoring, was introduced to the market, and there's been a nice evolution of that technology over the last 25 years, from being a clinic use, blinded to the patient, to being at-home use, real-time to the patient. 2023 finished with $10 billion in revenue in continuous glucose monitoring alone. And that rate of revenue is continuing to grow year over year at a pretty dramatic rate, and that's fueled by technological innovations in the space, as well as reimbursement. Even with all that momentum behind it, the technology is still only about, or the market is only about 50 to 60% penetrated, depending on whether you're talking type 1 or type 2 patients. Why is that? Well, one of the main drivers of that is because of the fact that in one form or another, there's challenges with the technology. While the technology is very good and there's been tremendous growth, most of the innovations that have happened pretty much up until about 5 years ago. Not that there haven't been improvements in the last 5 years, but the fact is that the quantum leaps were happening prior to that, and incremental improvements have been happening since. And they're all good. But in the end, when you look at the challenges for CGM, this is market research done by a company called DQ&A. It is a strictly diabetes-only market research firm. And 5 years ago, when the maturation of the CGM technology really got into its pretty much where it is today, they reached out and did a survey of about 1,300 CGM users, and they asked, what were their remaining challenges? What do they want to see out of the technology? And anything that scored over 20% is in this particular chart, and you can see the top 6 reasons. And most of those have to do with the fact that the device isn't wearable. It doesn't last long enough. There's adhesive issues. The device could be smaller or it could be thinner. It takes time for it to warm up before it can work, because you have to go through that every time you replace the sensor. Every so many days. And so these are the challenges that these patients were facing in 2018, even though it was a much better technology than just the standard spot measurement devices. One of the other challenges that they felt was that, as you can see, 32% of the patients felt that the devices were not accurate enough. These devices are indeed quite accurate. They measure quite well. But what patients are used to is their blood finger stick measurements, which blood is the gold standard. It is instantaneous. And when you're measuring with these wearable devices that have a little sensor element that goes under the skin, that's not in the blood. That's in the subcutaneous tissue. And there's a delay. And many patients don't understand that delay and how long that delay is and its impact on the actual readings that they get. So they think that the device may not be accurate. So now fast forward to 2023, the same survey was performed, and you can see that the same top 6 reasons or challenges, if you will, are still there. And not only that, but it's stronger. And this time there's about 3,400 patients in the survey. And again, same types of issues. Most of it, the fact that it's wearable, and the fact that there isn't much of an accuracy, or they feel that there isn't. It could be much more accurate than it is. So what we're providing is a solution that addresses those 2 major concerns. And we're coming to market with what we're calling continuous blood glucose monitoring. So we want to measure the best of both worlds. We want to measure blood, which is the gold standard, and we want to do it continuously as opposed to the spot check by the finger sticks, which is also the new gold standard for diabetes management. Continuous glucose monitoring, as I said, is where everything is heading. And so we have an implantable device, 100% implantable, no wearable components, nothing on the body. The device is implanted under the skin, and it transmits the data directly to the patient's smartphone. You can see the device. It's on this picture here. It's next to these nickels, and it has a catheter that goes into the bloodstream, and that's into a blood vessel, and that's how we're getting the actual blood measurement. How are we doing this? We're not creating new science. We're not creating new technology. We're standing on the shoulders of giants in the cardiology space. As you can see, this device form factor and shape is exactly like an insertable cardiac monitor. There's about 100,000 of those implanted every single year in the US alone. Technology that's about 25, 30 years old. Very acceptable, very safe, very known procedures, very known device. Likewise, our catheter with the electrodes on it for the glucose sensing. Same things, very much like a cardiac pacemaker lead. Goes in using the same procedures, same techniques, same tools. However, it doesn't go in all the way into the heart. It just goes a few centimeters into the blood vessel and stops there. And these devices are built with the same types of designs and materials that the cardiology devices are built with. Same types of materials, processes, and technologies. So this is not new to medical devices. It's just, this type of technology is new to diabetes. On the sensing side, again, we're not creating a brand new sensing paradigm, some novel sensing technique that needs to be proven. We have a tried and true sensing technique. We're using standard enzyme-based sensing. All the others are using as well. The difference is they're making theirs to last for a couple of weeks. We're making ours to last for a minimum of 2 years. We believe we can even get to 3 years. So this is the technology that we're moving forward with. But before we decided to really move, very far down the road with that, we did want to pressure test this with patients, because we understand that it's an implantable device and that there is a barrier, implantable devices that does present a barrier for, patient adoption. So we did a market survey of, we wanted to do 600 patients, 600 type 1 and type 2 diabetes patients, mixture of CGM users, ex-users, non-users, pump wearers, pump non-wearers. So you have a mix of, tech users, tech non-users. And we went to that same research organization, DQ&A, and we asked them to do the panel for us. And we wanted to do 600 patients. And before we could even, realize there was such demand for or interest in patients to do the survey, we were over 750 before we could turn the spigot off. So we had 757 patients that signed up for this and did the survey, and we were very transparent with them about the technology, that it's implantable, and it goes into a blood vessel, and how long it lasts, and what the procedure is like, and so forth. And what we found was that more than half the patients were likely to acquire the technology. They were very interested in. What was even more surprising to us is we thought we would be most appealing to the CGM non-users. But in fact, the strongest population actually that was with most interest was the CGM current users, current users of CGM technology. And followed just by 1 percentage point behind was the ex-users of CGM technology, people who tried it and walked away from it. So that was very, very interesting for us to find. And it's understandable. These patients, they live with the technology day in and day out. They're very grateful for it. I have a grandson who's using this. It's wonderful technology, but it does complicate their lives. And if there's a way to make their lives simpler, because it's complicated enough managing their disease and devices, they're open for this. When we asked them what the most appealing aspects were, you can see here in the box that they're 2-year sensor life. Basically sensor life, not wearable, and that fact that it measures blood glucose, which means it's more accurate. So overall, the things that they wanted, that they were looking for in 2018 and again in 2023, is they feel that this particular concept addresses that need. It addresses those needs. Now, we've also done similar research on the healthcare provider side. We've spoken with endocrinologists and implanting cardiac specialists that would be doing the implant procedure for this. And we've gotten, very similar positive results. We're not finished with the analyses yet, and we have a couple more questionnaires to go with them. And we will be presenting that information at a later conference. But suffice it to say, acceptance is very good with them as well. Where this lands in terms of an investment opportunity, well, prior to last year, again, CGM was primarily just for type 1 and type 2 patients who were insulin dependent, on intensive insulin therapy, that is. That means they needed to take 4 or more injections a day or be on an insulin pump. But because of the preponderance of evidence of CGM technology benefiting patients and helping them to manage their disease, despite some of the challenges that the technologies have, the CMS, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Reimbursement, has decided to reimburse type 2 patients who are on basal insulin, which is once a day, or not on insulin, but at risk for hypoglycemia. That effectively more than doubled the market to almost 11 million patients. And when you look at, even if we had, we don't expect to displace any of the big players in the field today. So we don't expect, to take a 50% market share. But we do expect to be in the 5 to 10% range at a minimum. And even at that low minimum, we're still looking at least $1 billion a year annual revenue once the company is commercial. Where are we in our development timeline? Well, 2023, 24, and going on into 25, we've been doing a lot of preclinical studies, animal studies, large animal models, and also all in preparation for our first in human clinical, which we will be kicking off this year, later this summer in August, followed by much later in the year, another study. And then next year, in about 6 months after that, a third study, All of these in preparation for a large pivotal trial, which will be done, multi-center pivotal trial, which will be done for FDA approval. We expect that trial to run its course and also eventually, submit and get approval from the agency sometime in the latter part of 2027. Just to give you a taste of the type of data that we're seeing from our devices in the large animal models, here's an example. This is a typical example. There's some better, there's some worse. This is typical. What you can see here is the red dots are the blood glucose values from a clinical lab analyzer, and the green and blue dots are our sensors. There's 2 of them in each animal. And this particular animal, you can see that we not only both of those track the blood very well, but they track each other very well. Moreover, you see this little statistic out here, MARD. That's the metric that CGMs use for accuracy, and you can see we're below 4% on both of these, and we can repeatedly get there with other devices as well in other animals, and comparatively to the rest of the market that's commercially available today, they're seeing typically in the 7 to 10% range. So we feel that we have a much better accuracy at this stage of our development. Now, this is one avenue that we can take our technology, but we have actually more than one bite at the apple here. There's another avenue where how we can get our technology into the hands of patients to help make their lives a little bit more simple, as well as make the clinicians' management of those patients a lot easier as well. And that is actually in the epidural space. I had that in one of my opening slides. And that may be odd for you to grasp. Why would you sense glucose in the epidural space? That's going to take a little bit more of context. And the context is painful diabetic neuropathy. 1 out of 5 patients with diabetes has or winds up with painful diabetic neuropathy. That's about 7 million in the US alone. Large patient population. This is where typically the bottoms of their feet, sometimes palms of their hands, is burning. It's aching, it's very painful, itching, tingling, and it's a neurological pain. And these patients really don't have a strong solution. The medications that are available for this treatment have a lot of bad side effects and are not as efficacious as they could be. And because of those 2 factors, there's not much good compliance with the medication usage. Now, another medical device industry, implantable that is, spinal cord stimulators, which are FDA approved for pain management, and has 4 major players, as you can see here, and a few other smaller ones. It's a multi-billion-dollar market. It's the 2nd largest market in implantable devices in the US, behind the cardiac devices. And these players said, well, painful diabetic neuropathy, PDN, that's lower limb pain. We should be able to treat that. And really, just in the last few years, just this decade, they've done studies to show that compared to optimal medical treatment, which is the medication, that their therapies way outperform the medication treatment. And not only are these patients doing better with their neuropathy, but they're able to move more, which means they're more mobile, they're losing weight, their A1Cs go down, their diabetes is improving overall as a side benefit. One of these studies even shows that over long-term follow-up, they're starting to reverse the effects. So, what does that mean for us? We're glucose sensor experts. We're not stimulator experts. Well, the value proposition here is that we can, as you can see on the right here, these electrodes, these are the types of catheters that they put in the epidural space to do the stimulation. And these catheters are very similar to our catheter that we use in the blood. We could put our chemistry on one of these catheters and sense glucose in the epidural space, of course, if that's possible. And we hunted high and low to determine if that was possible. We couldn't find any publication or patent to that effect. And so we did it ourselves. And we decided to take an off-the-shelf spinal cord stimulator lead, do several animals. And this is typical of the data that we see. You can see the green dots is a Dexcom sensor, the blue dots is us. And this is an animal up and about, walking around, eating a high sugar diet, and returning back to that when they're hungry again. And the results are phenomenal. And we're wrapping up a long-term chronic study with this in these animals as we speak. The value of this is it gives us an opportunity as well to have a strategic partnerships with potential, any one of these potential large players in the market. The other value is that market access. Typically an implantable device, or any medical device for that matter, but specifically implantable devices, which is, ours, has one call point, one physician customer, if you will. In our case, we have three. We have the endocrinologists who typically manage the patients. Endocrinologists do not like doing procedures, and they will refer out for the procedure. And so they can refer to the cardiac specialist that implants the intravascular, or to the pain management specialist that implants the spinal cord stimulator. Those docs, the cardiac specialists, the pain management specialists, because of the high comorbidity of diabetes with cardiovascular disease for the cardiac specialty, or obesity for the pain management docs, those docs have a high cohort of diabetes patients, primarily type 2, in their patient populations, and they see a lot of them coming to them. And they're managing those patients. They have good rapport with those patients. So they themselves can refer their patients to for them to do the implant for their patients, and then send those patients back to the endocrinologist for management. So they can have this very synergistic relationship with the endocrinologist as a managing physician and them as the implanting physician. So in summary, we have three physician call points, three ways of getting this technology into the medical space, and in particular into the hands of patients who are willing to have an implant. Now, the other side of the coin with the spinal cord stimulation approach, or the diabetic neuropathy approach, is that these patients have already decided to have an implant. They want that implant to manage their pain. So with the same procedure, same device, they get pain management and continuous glucose monitoring without any need for a wearable on their body. So in summary, we believe we have a very large addressable market. As I mentioned, $10 billion a year in 2023 and growing very fast. It's growing, driven by the type 1 and type 2 market, but also there's other trends in the healthcare space, the cardiovascular disease specialties. They're looking at CGM a lot, trying to understand the effects of glucose on cardiovascular disease and the genesis and management of that. We're also seeing some of these players making a direct-to-consumer play on the open market with an over-the-counter CGM, and a lot of digital health solutions. And what we're offering is an innovative solution, not a me too, not another solution like everybody else, but an innovative solution with potential strategic alignment as well, such as with spinal cord stimulation technology. Thank you for your time. I'm interested for any questions that you may have.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Paul, for sharing the story with us. Maybe we could just start with, zooming out on the CGM landscape. Could you tell us a little bit, about the status quo for the life of a device and, some of the demand for patients to have longer devices, and then maybe kind of the reimbursement environment and incentives, for those longer devices?
Yeah, good question. So there's 4 commercial devices on the market today in the US. 3 of them are wearable percutaneous devices that go under the skin, have a sensing element that goes under the skin, and a lot of electronics that are worn on top of the skin, and it transmits to the smartphone. They last anywhere from 7 to 14 days, or actually a 15-day sensor just got released recently. And that's pretty much the pinnacle of what they've been able to get. They're trying to get to 30, but 25 years ago, they started out at 3 days, and today they're at anywhere from 7 to 15 days. And when they would need to be taken off and replaced. There's one implantable on the market today, and earlier, about a year ago, they got 6 months. They launched with a 3-month longevity claim, and then about a year ago, they got 6-month longevity, and they think they might, they're trying to get to 1 year, and that may happen by the end of this year with them. They've submitted to the agency, but that device also requires a wearable because it doesn't have a battery, and so you have to have a device over the implant to power it and transmit the data out. The reimbursement is different for the implant versus the wearables. The wearables have pretty much the exact same across the board, the same reimbursement, even though their price points are dramatically different between the 3 of them. And they're hitting different markets. One is more type 1 specific, one is more type 2 specific, one is more type 1 with pump specific, and all that is still evolving a bit. And where we would land is we would be more along the lines of the implantable, but our reimbursement would leverage more of the cardiac reimbursement CPT codes, that more so than these, because it is very similar to those implants.
Very helpful context. Thank you. And so, maybe we could touch on something that you mentioned earlier, which is the timeline of approval. Could you just get a little bit more granular and help us understand, what is the approval timeline, and, how many patients are involved, and, are there kind of any interim readouts or milestones along the way?
Yes, indeed. So as I mentioned, this is a very crude Gantt. So as I mentioned, this year, in August, we're going to be doing our first in human study. So we've been working all this year preparing for that and to have that study. That'll be our, again, first in human. We'll be doing it very safely, just about a dozen patients. I think we're targeting 10 patients. And then we're going to follow that later in the year, right near the end of the year, with another study, taking those learnings from the first study and doing 20 plus patients in that. And then around mid next year, we will then do a much larger trial and more clinical centers as a dry run for what we call the pivotal trial, which is the trial that would be used for FDA approval. That trial is probably, we're still, in the early stages of talking about all that with the FDA, so it's speculative to say, but based upon historical data and what others have done, that can be, in the couple of hundred patient type of range, plus or minus. And there are regulatory guidelines by the FDA as to how they expect these devices to perform and how to do the measurements. So there's not a whole lot of new clinical design, so to speak, because we have one implantable that came ahead of us and a bunch of percutaneous devices. So we will not necessarily be blazing new trails there. That trial, we expect to run it for every patient for a year, even though we know we can do 2 years, probably even 3 years, to get to market sooner rather than later. The FDA is going to, whatever claim we make, they're going to want us to show that. So we will do a 1-year study to start with. We will try to negotiate with the FDA. No, negotiate is not the right word, but try to work with the FDA for them to allow us to follow those patients after approval and get their 2-year data and their 3-year data and submit those as those milestones happen to increment our indication of use from a 1-year life to a 2-year life to a 3-year life.
Great context. Thank you. And could you give us a sense, from a financial standpoint, like how your, cash and runway aligns with some of the upcoming milestones you just touched on?
Yeah, good question. So we are a very undervalued company at this point, because of our history. We have some of that legacy that we carry with us from the previous product and previous company structure. And so our stock is very low at this point. So it's good value to jump in. But because of that, we plan on doing a significant raise, and as I mentioned here, 20 million. We plan on doing that raise after we get first in human data. We think that'll be a very significant inflection point, along with whatever news we're going to have between now and then as well. And at that point, we'll do a significant raise to carry us through 2025 at the edge of starting our pivotal trial. We expect to need about 20 to 30 to get through that trial, not just trial costs, but also running the company and of course, ramping up production further and so forth. And at that point, through to FDA approval. At that point, there will be a commercialization effort. Either, if we're not partnered with somebody by that point, as with a strategic for a distribution agreement, then we will commercialize our own. We will raise accordingly to accommodate that.
Very helpful. Thank you. And we're almost at time, so maybe we could just end by, zooming out, and if you could just share and sum up the value proposition for investors who might be looking, across diabetes investment opportunities?
Sure. I would like to say that I think that the unique opportunity here is there is room for something better. The patients are asking for it. The docs are asking for it. It's not to say what is out there is bad. What is out there is good. It's really good. But patients' lives are complicated. They have to manage supplies. They have to manage logistics. They have to manage 2 devices on their bodies, a pump, a sensor, most of them. There's a lot there. So what can be done to make their lives easier, to make sure they adhere to wearing these devices, to make sure the physicians get all the information they need to help the patients manage their indications. That's what we're offering as a unique opportunity. This is the next generation of CGM, and we're the only ones that can offer this accurate of a sensing technique and this long of a sensing technique for these patients, as well as combining with potentially other implantable devices where the patients have already decided to have an implant, like spinal cord stimulator technology, for example.
Absolutely. Well, very exciting. With that, we are at time. So thank you again, Paul, for sharing the story with us. And thank you as well, everybody, for listening to the Glucotrack story today.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, everybody.
Take care.